Today is Thursday, January 25th, and today I'm wondering just how the Cowboys are going to fix it.
And now, a word from our title sponsor.
Are all financial advisors fiduciaries? Fewer than you think. Not knowing could reduce your lifestyle. Hi, I'm Mitch Kramer, founder and CEO of Fluent Financial. A fiduciary is a regulatory term to reduce conflicts of interest in wealth management. A fiduciary always works in your best interest. A non-fiduciary advisor might put their compensation or company ahead of yours. At Fluent Financial, we are certified financial planners acting as fiduciary advisors. To learn more, go to fluentfinancial.com or Fluent Financial's YouTube channel.
What's damaged your roof? Hail, water, wind, maybe just age. Hail Roofing is where to turn. They've provided the best options, advice, and solutions, be it residential or commercial. For more than a decade now, you can trust Hail to restore your property expertly. Hail. That's OHHHAIL. Hail.com. With seasonings, there seem to be so many, and then they just sit in your spice cabinet forever. That's not true of Goodness Steak seasoning. I know the name steak suggests that it's very good on steak, which it is, but Goodness Steak seasoning is so versatile. Use it on veggies, burgers, soups, even popcorn. Get it by going to the website bringthetasty.com. Goodness, this seasoning is good.
It's strange, this talk of fixing a 12-5 team. They've brought back Coach McCarthy, and that's not all necessarily bad. So I'm going to stop here and say, if your coach is in the last year of his contract, that can affect what's happening in a locker room. But let's put that aside and continue on with our mission about fixing it. The Cowboys talk of how close they are, of everything's in place. You know, everything's not in place. It's okay to run back this team with the same core, but there must be additions to that core. This team isn't as good as the 4 or 5 or 6 best teams in the National Football League. So let's start by being truthful about their needs. Let's have a reality check about this team and what it needs. In no particular order, but I will say number 1, a big, tough, playmaking linebacker. Now you're saying, wait a minute, we have Micah Parsons. He's not really a linebacker. He's a Swiss Army knife. Sometimes they play him at defensive end. He's a rush linebacker. But we need some big, tough guy in the middle to play the middle and plug the middle. Leighton Vander Esch was good at that. But the Cowboys this year, a good part of the time, played a safety at linebacker, Marquise Bell. Now, hey, I don't have any problem with Marquise Bell as a player. He just weighs 205 pounds. Wait a minute. He weighs 40 pounds less than me? And he's standing in a spot in linebacker in the National Football League? That's an invitation to good teams to run the ball against the Cowboys. And a lot of good teams ran the ball against the Cowboys. Next, this team needs a power running back. No, I'm not saying let's go back and get Zeke again. I'm saying that they need someone like the young Zeke. Tony Pollard, that took over the number 1 running back job once Zeke left, he's a good player, but he's not a number 1 running back. He's a number 2 running back. This team needs somewhat of a bull to play that position. Now, can you find that in the draft? Yeah, you might. You very well might, because runners get found at all levels of the draft. But how important is it to run the ball? I know. Everybody in the National Football League slinging it around these days. Just throw the ball every place. But how important is running the ball? Well, Let's look at this weekend's semifinal games in the National Football League. Baltimore versus Kansas City in the AFC. In yards per carry this season, Baltimore finished number 3 in the league in rushing. Kansas City was number 8 in the league. Over in the NFC, where the Niners meet the Lions, San Francisco was number 4 in the league in yards per carry, and Detroit was number 5 in the league in yards per carry. In this day and age of enormous passing stats, you've got to be able to run the ball in the National Football League. The Cowboys, they finished 18th in yards per carry. In fact, the Cowboys are what I refer to as a negative running team. The opponent gained a little bit more every time they ran the ball than did the Cowboys. That must change. If it starts with running back, that takes us to the next need. A big old run-stuffing defensive lineman. Yeah, I know. That's what Mozzie Smith was supposed to be when the Cowboys made him a number 1 draft choice in last year's draft. He's an enormous disappointment. In fact, he's now lost a bunch of weight, and he's over backing up Odigizua at the other defensive tackle, instead of being the massive, tough run stopper the Cowboys drafted him to be. So, this year's draft looks identical to last year's draft in that one need. The Cowboys need to go back and find another big run-stuffing tackle. And finally, maybe this is the most important one. The other 3 certainly are important, but hardly anybody talks about this team's offensive line. Cowboys used to have, at various stops in their history, amongst the very best offensive lines in this league. They aren't there anymore. By the way, the inability to run the ball is partial proof of that. Let's look at the 5 starters. Tyron Smith, thank God, he was healthy most of the year. But he's now marching toward his middle 30s, and he has had a recent history of a lot of injuries. The left guard, Tyler Smith, he had a solid year, a lot more penalties than you'd like. He had a solid year, so he's part of the future. Starting center Tyler Biadasz, he's free. He can go anywhere this offseason. The right guard, Zach Martin, man, he's a good player. But is he a great player anymore? The people who study this suggest no. They suggest Zach Martin, who is going to be a Hall of Famer, is now back at just being a very good player. And the right tackle, Terrence Steele, he was poor. He's just flat out poor. And all this contributes to the Cowboys not being able to run the football. And by the way, the depth in the offensive line, there's all sorts of questions about the people who are backups in the offensive line, several of whom were drafted in the 4th and 5th rounds the last few years. Now, let's go to some questions about the Cowboys. What will Dallas do? Does this team strike you as a team that makes difficult decisions, that it clenches its fist and bangs it on the table? No, it does not appear that way to me. Does this team remind you of an aggressive free agency team? Well, I'm going to say no, but the cap problems they have really does sort of corral them in this situation. They're not as free to give out money as a lot of other teams because they've already given out so much money to the people on this roster now. Next, Will McClay in his draft. Will McClay is a standout front office guy. He's had some wonderful drafts. He and his scouts should be commended for the several years before last year and the drafting on this team. Last year, I'll say it, horrendous. The draft was terrible. In fact, there's one rating agency that it describes the impact on the team of their draft. Where the Cowboys finished in impact on their team in the last draft? Dead last. Worst draft in the NFL for impact on the team. And finally, does this team remind you of being proactive? Is it a team that's suggestive of thinking out of the box? I'm saying no. This team, it seems to me, is more comfortable in the box. And those 12-5 records are excellent. I'm not trying to throw those out at all. But something is keeping this team from moving on in the postseason. And by the way, next year's schedule, take a look at it. It's way more tough than this year when the Cowboys had a whole bunch of cream puffs on the schedule. Next year, is this team going to fix it? Quite honestly, I don't know.
Today's episode has been brought to you by Fluent Financial, by Oh Hell Roofing, and by Goodness Steak Seasoning.
Just Wondering is a production of DSP Media for FanStream Sports. You can find Norm's show along with other great programming at fanstreamsports.com.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Just Wondering. If you enjoyed it, please hit follow. Then each episode every weekday will be delivered straight to you. And if we might ask one more favor, please share it with friends. I'm Norm Hitzges, and every day I'll be just wondering about something.
And I'm Mary Hitchkus, and I'm just wondering too.